We'd like to remind everyone that this is a town hall, not a debate. And the purpose of this is for students to hear from each of the candidates tonight and not for the candidates to debate or attack each other. And one final reminder is that this event is being recorded by WSHC, a radio station operated by students at Shepherd University. Please keep this in mind when you are talking, and please refrain from using any profanity. Once again, thank you for coming to the For Students, by Students Town Hall, and thank you to all the candidates who have already been up there, currently up there, or will be up there. So let's get started by having each of the candidates briefly introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Doyle.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for putting this on. My name is John Doyle. I grew up in Charlestown. I'm a graduate of Shepherd University. It was Shepherd College at the time. Majored in political science, minored in history. I served in the Army in Vietnam as an infantry soldier, and I served 26 years in the West Virginia House of Delegates. So a number of the laws that are on the books now are my responsibility for whether you like them or not. And in fact, I've probably cast over 40,000 roll call votes. During my time in the legislature, I stand by every one of them except about a half a dozen that I later decided were mistakes. So you can't get them all right. But anyway, I look forward, if you choose to elect me, to serve as your senator representing the district that is all of Jefferson County and part of Berkeley County. Thank you.
Now on to Mr. Espinosa.
Well, thank you, Eli. I'm Paul Espinosa, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Shepherd University Student Government Association, as well as the Stubblefield Institute Civility Club for hosting tonight's candidate forums. I've been honored to represent the Eastern Panhandle in the West Virginia legislature since my election in 2012, and I've been committed to helping West Virginia become an even better place to live, work, and raise a family. I believe Berkeley and Jefferson counties deserve the strongest team possible to make sure their voices are heard in Charleston. As state senator for the 16th district, I'll bring the same collaborative consensus building approach to the state senate that I've demonstrated time and time again in the West Virginia House of Delegates. I respectfully ask, well, I'm sorry, too far. While much has been accomplished in the last 12 years, certainly much remains to be done, and I look forward to discussing those issues this evening. Thank you.
So as with the previous panel, the first question will, of course, be a more lighthearted question, which is, what is your favorite memory from Shepherd University? Starting with Mr. Espinosa.
Well, thank you, Eli. You know, as a Jefferson High School student who took a couple semesters of college English here through Shepherd University, I like to consider myself just a little bit of a alumni here of Shepherd. But I actually attended West Virginia Wesleyan College and graduated there. And I remember one memory that it's funny and favorite today. It wasn't too funny at the time. I can remember at that time my Wesleyan Bobcats were actually a pretty good football team, or at least all the prognosticators were saying, you know, this is their year. They're going to really compete for the conference championship that year. And so our son, Paul Jr., who was probably about, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years old at the time, he dutifully joined me to come over here and watch his dad's Wesleyan Bobcats hopefully do well against the Shepherd Rams. And the Shepherd Rams proceeded just march up and down the field, and I think they put up probably about 40 points by halftime. And I can remember my 4 or 5-year-old son looking at me and saying, "Daddy, when is your team going to score?" And so that was painful, but it certainly was a precursor of things to come. If you look at what Shepherd has accomplished, certainly it's been great watching them the last number of years. And but it still makes for a good memory, as painful it was at the time.
Mr. Doyle?
Thank you. About 50 years ago, I think it was, Shepherd started women's basketball, and I went to the first game. And ever since then, I have followed the Shepherd women's basketball team. And the two highlights were when they got to the Sweet 16 twice. And I was in Charleston. We were in session, and I drove all the way from Charleston. They were in the tournament at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I drove all the way from Charleston, and I got lost, and I missed the game. Next day, we're in session again. We ended. This time, I actually made sure to look where I was going. And so I got to the game, and Shepherd won. That was the two together. The fact that I first got lost but then got there is probably the most memorable event related to Shepherd. There are a whole lot of them, but that's the most memorable. Probably wouldn't have been as memorable if I hadn't have gotten lost.
Okay, so now we will open up the floor for students to ask questions. Great.
Hi, good evening. What do you think is the best way to encourage young people who want to leave West Virginia once they gain their education? What do you think is the best way to encourage them to stay in the state?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, of course. What do you think is the best way to encourage young people to stay in West Virginia once they've gained their education and want to leave the state?
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Mr. Doyle.
Yes. We need to become a more welcoming state. There was a time that West Virginia was one of the most welcoming states in the Union, and you could talk with people all around the country who said that. But in recent years, we have adopted the attitude that whatever it is that whatever reason we can come up with to say we don't want you here, that's what we have done. And we have to get out of that. Yeah, I do know that, or I sense, that a lot of people think that the only thing that counts is the job climate and the tax climate and things like that. Those are very important. But it's also important that somebody who moves here senses from his or her neighbors that he's welcome. And that's what we have to do.
Mr. Espinosa.
Well, your question really gets at the heart of one of the big reasons why I decided to run for office back in 2012, and that was so that we didn't have to continually see young people like yourself, you know, if not actually be in that situation, since that they were in a situation where they had to leave West Virginia for opportunities. So a big part of my work in the legislature over the last 12 years as House Education Chairman, later as House Majority Whip, and currently as Speaker Pro Tem, is to try to address those impediments to job creation that for so long have caused West Virginia to kind of lag behind surrounding states. And I'm very pleased to say that I think we've made a lot of progress there. If you look at our tax code, implementing the largest tax cut in state history, $750 million tax cut, along with other measures that do make West Virginia a more attractive place to do business. Regulatory requirement. Now, with legislation we put in place, each and every year we have regulations that once upon a time those regulations were on the books, and once they were on the books, they stayed there, whether they made any sense or not. Unfortunately, some of those regulations really weren't serving a purpose, but they were serving as an impediment to businesses wanting to come here and offer well-paying jobs with benefits. And so now we regularly review those. Tort reform, looking at our legal system, making sure that we're not providing disincentives for businesses to want to locate here. Because again, if you want your young folks to stay here, you have to provide opportunities for them to work here, be able to make a living, provide for their families. So I think those are some of the things that I've certainly been pleased to play a role in, and that if I'm fortunate to serve you in the state Senate, I'll continue to look at ways where we can attract quality businesses and the quality jobs and benefits associated with those. Thank you.
We'll open the floor to another student question, if anyone has any.
with the increase in jobs in the area and more factories and, well, not factories, warehouses opening in the area, how do you guys look for to help conserve the environment while providing us with these job opportunities as the youth?
Start with you, Mr. Espinosa.
Could you, I'm sorry, you're going all the way back to your seat. I just didn't
Yeah,
hear-
could you repeat it for me, too?
the last part, I think you made a reference to the environment. I just wanted to make sure that's what I heard.
How do you guys plan to conserve the environment while giving us opportunities for jobs in the Panhandle?
Yep. Well, that's certainly a fair question. My wife and I, we are lifelong residents of Jefferson County. We live on 3 acres outside of incorporated areas of Jefferson County. We rely on well water, so trust me, the last thing we want is to see our wells not be able to be used. And we love Jefferson County for probably the same things that attracted you here to Shepherd University, is just the beauty around us. But I do think that they are not mutually exclusive. I think the key is you have to have good, effective regulations so that we can hold businesses accountable. And I think if you look at some of the job creators we've attracted here, Procter & Gamble in Berkeley County, Clorox, Macy's, I'll even say Rockwell there, because if you look at what Rockwell's done, despite the fact that they were, it was a controversial topic, particularly initially, I think they've demonstrated that some folks may find this a surprise, but over 88% of the water that Rockwell uses to produce their products is rainwater. I mean, the sustainability that they and other companies in this area are trying to employ, I think, are a testament to the fact that you can do both. So I think we just need to, one, have effective regulations in place, and then we need to hold those companies accountable for meeting those regulations. And I've demonstrated during my 12 years in the legislature, I'm willing to do just that, make sure that we have good regulations that make sense, ensure our safety of our environment, but don't add unnecessary expense to folks that are trying to live here in West Virginia. I know there's been some concerns about the cost of water rates here. Well, if you talk to rural water companies in West Virginia, they'll tell you one of the big things that escalates water rates is by having regulations that don't necessarily provide a benefit, but they do increase the cost. So I think we need to be careful that everything we do makes sense and is actually providing for a safer, cleaner environment.
I don't think we do have the right regulations. I stand for clean air and clean water and good jobs. I think it is not only possible to get them both, I think they feed on each other. And Paul mentioned the water rates. We have in West Virginia the highest water rates, among the highest water rates in the country, and among the highest electric utility rates in the country. And I think that is, there are a number of factors, but I think the decision is made by the West Virginia Public Service Commission. I have decided after these many years that we need a public service commission that is more accountable to the people than the one we have now. And so if I am elected, I will be proposing that we have an elected public service commission, as a number of states have. So then the people of our state, when they're upset about water rates or electric rates, can go to the people they elected and say, hey, fix this problem.
Let's get an opening for any student questions. Great.
Hello.
Hello?
How do you plan to make West Virginia more diverse and inclusive?
Start with
So
you.
say that again.
How do you plan to make West Virginia more diverse and inclusive?
More inclusive. I alluded to that earlier when I said we need to be more welcoming. We passed a law 3 years ago, which I voted against, which effectively bans abortion. That is not a welcoming law. I want to, if I'm elected, I will work to restore reproductive freedom to the people, to the women of West Virginia. I think we've passed some anti-trans legislation that I think has been unnecessary. Now, let me get into that for a minute. There is one aspect of the trans question that I think is legitimate. I've talked to a number of people who are students here at Shepherd, women who are concerned that that a male transiting to female might be able to beat them out for a position on a sports team. I actually think that the Secondary Schools Activities Commission came up with a way to handle this that makes sense. What they have suggested is it's sort of like the NFL Combine. You got a half a dozen coaches, and you put the person through their paces. These are people who know whether or not they should be on a women's team or not. I think if we did something like that, that settles that problem. And all of these other problems are, I think, just so much noise.
Mr. Espinosa?
Well, thank you for the question. As the apparently the first Latino elected to the West Virginia legislature, I certainly pride myself on my heritage. And I think first and foremost, I think we just need to treat people respectfully. I think sometimes we probably overthink the issue a little bit. I think the best way not to discriminate is to not discriminate. I think when we set up these artificial barriers, I think it only creates more issues by discriminating with folks. You look at on college campuses, I mean, this has been a hot topic. I don't think so much here at Shepherd University, but some of our premier colleges were clearly discriminating against individuals, not on the basis of their merit, but on the basis of their skin and their ethnic heritage. And so how does that help advance equity when you're discriminating against individuals who, based on merit, would certainly have been admitted to those institutions. So I think we just need to focus on not discriminating. I will say that in my coming up here on 62 years in West Virginia as a resident, I found West Virginia to be very welcoming. Now, am I suggesting that there's no discrimination? Absolutely not. I mean, while any discrimination I experienced as a Latino was very, very mild to what perhaps some other folks have, I have found West Virginia to be a very welcoming people. And I think we just need to treat people as we would like to be treated. I do think there is a place for encouraging folks who maybe don't traditionally be involved in certain fields. I was touring a factory recently, saw a female welder. I thought that was awesome, and she was doing that because she was encouraged to enter a field which historically has been kind of a male field. Thank you.
Once again, it is open to students.
Hello.
Hello.
Sometimes I feel like the panhandle of West Virginia feels like a different world from the rest of the state, and that can certainly be seen with what Mr. Doyle is talking about with like anti-trans bills and abortion bans. So I'm kind of wondering how you plan to represent the interests of the panhandle against like the rest of the state and their more conservative views.
I think that's to me, Eli, or not? Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. And I will say that I do believe that my colleagues in the legislature, 100 in the House, 34 in the Senate, I do think that they do their very best on balance to try to represent their constituents. And I sense just from having worked with many of the legislators for more than a decade, a few of them at least, that again, I don't sense that there's desire to really hurt anybody or exclude anybody. I think they were genuinely trying to enact legislation that they feel, represents their constituents. And there's typically a handful of bills. Well, let me say this first. Each year, there's probably over 2,000 bills that are introduced. Any legislator can introduce a bill. Only a legislator can introduce a bill, actually, either a House member or Senate member. But over 2,000 bills that are introduced. Typically, at the end of the day, there's probably 250, maybe 300. I think one year it was quite a few bills. Maybe it was 350. But still, it's like 10% or maybe a little bit more than that in a really busy year that actually get enacted. Of that 250 to 350 bills, I'd say probably 95 to 98% of the bills pass almost unanimously. There's a few bills that are a little contentious. Again, I mean and it's natural and not. I guess I could criticize him now because he's left, our media representative here this evening. I know Steve, he's a good guy. But they're obviously going to focus in on those bills that are most contentious. I don't think that really helps necessarily the civil dialogue, but I think that's what we have to deal with sometimes, that those few bills do get probably more attention than they deserve.
Great. Mr. Doyle?
I agree with Paul that the vast majority of members of the legislature want to do the right thing as they see it. The problem is that in many cases I disagree with their view as to what the right thing is. I think there are many bills that end up being passed. For example, the campus carry. I was in the legislature 3 years ago when it first came up, and I voted against it. If we're going to have that on the books, I think we need to restrict it more than it is now. In fact, I remember a few months ago being at a town hall here where a number of legislators were present, and we talked about that campus carry bill, and I was sitting at the same table with Charlie Trump, Senator Charlie Trump, and several students, and several those students came up with several changes they thought that ought to be made in the law if we were going to have it. And Charlie said, actually, he thought they made sense. Well, the legislature took no action this time. If we're going to have that law, it needs to be much more tightly restricted than it is now. And let's remember this. The Second Amendment, just like everything else in the Constitution, is subject to reasonable regulation. No right guaranteed in the Constitution is sacrosanct in and of itself. All of them are subject to reasonable regulation. And so the question is, we need to all sit down in a spirit of compromise and determine what the right regulation is.
Once again, do we have any student questions? Great.
Hi. Do you have any plans on increasing public university affordability and accessibility, especially for impoverished students? Thank you.
I do. The 26 years I was in the House of Delegates, I served on the Finance Committee for 19 years and was chair of the Higher Education Subcommittee of the Finance Committee for 12 of those years. I don't think they have that subcommittee anymore. And I worked all the time to try and get more money into the base budgets of the institutions so that the institutions did not have to charge tuition. Again, back to the question of well-meaning legislators. Many legislators I dealt with at the time honestly believed that students should pay more in tuition and there should be less public money supporting the institutions. And I found myself aghast at that because, after all, I mean, Shepherd is a public institution. That's its purpose, is to provide affordable education to the children of West Virginia taxpayers. And I think that just recently, Governor Justice line item vetoed the money that would go into the funding formula. For years, I argued in favor of a funding formula that would be fair to all the institutions. For 3 years, I was Deputy Secretary of Revenue under Governor Tomlin's second term, and I worked with the National Association of State Budget Officers to come up with a sensible funding formula to guarantee that a fair and sensible way of funding. We came up with that, and the funding formula the legislature came up with a few years ago tracks that. It is a really fair funding formula, and I commend Paul and some of the other legislators for passing it. But we can't have that if the governor's just going to come in and say, nope, line item veto, no.
Well, I can recall back when I was, after being elected in 2012 and being assigned to the House Education Committee and sitting in my seat, hearing my first presentation on, I think it was from the Higher Education Policy Commission on funding levels and so forth. And as I looked at the list of four-year institutions and I looked at the list of two-year institutions, who do you think was at the bottom of the list in per capita funding? Shepherd University and Blue Ridge Community and Technical College. So I promptly asked, well, why is this? And I heard some answers along the lines of, well, some programs are more expensive to provide than others, and I get that. But some of those engineering programs, for example, they're also charging some pretty hefty fees, though. So I kind of gathered that I wasn't getting the complete answer. And so after asking the question repeatedly and getting similar evasive answers, I came to the conclusion that there really was no good reason for a lot of the disparity. And so, as John alluded to, I really led the way in helping enact a funding formula that has helped to close the gap. Even though the funding formula hasn't been fully implemented, we have been able to provide additional funding for Blue Ridge and Shepherd University. So I think that's a big part of it. Allowing the colleges and universities to know these are the metrics that we need to focus on if we do want to have additional funding, so that everybody kind of knows. And I commend the four-year institutions for working very well, the 2 years as well, working together to help come up with that funding formula themselves, something that they felt they could buy into. So I think that's helped. And I'm sure I'm just about out of time. Was that just 1 minute or 2 minutes? Okay. So if I could just have a couple seconds there, because I know it kind of went off there for a second. One of the things that we also did, which I think has really helped our two-year institution, is providing the basically all-in full scholarship. Any individual that wants to pursue a degree in a field where there's a bona fide chance of getting an actual job, as long as they maintain a B average and follow a few other requirements, they can attend any of our two-year colleges and obtain those needed degrees free of charge. So I think that's really helping folks not only be educated, but be able to stay here in West Virginia. Thank you.
Questions?
I know you all just addressed education on a university level, but I'd like to talk about K through 12. So I know in West Virginia, there's somewhat of a teacher scarcity, I'll say. So what steps would you take to improve the West Virginia education system? Because I know myself being a West Virginia resident, did not have many of the best education in West Virginia, and then coming to college, it's been harder to keep up with some of my counterparts.
I've lost track who's first now. So,
Mr. Doyle?
When I was in the House of Delegates for a number of years, I was on a committee called the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability. LOCEA is what we call it. And I spent several years agitating for a required course in civics in every high school in West Virginia. And I finally succeeded. The State Board of Education, it wasn't a bill I passed. The State Board of Education, I think, finally got tired of listening to me. And they said, we're going to require civics. And what they said to each school district was, you can require it anywhere from the ninth grade to the 12th grade. See, when I graduated from Charlestown High School, I had civics in the ninth grade. And then as a senior in the 12th grade, I had a much more intense course called Problems of Democracy. I wish we could have that now. But at any rate, at least we did get civics required. Many places in the country, many states, many school districts do not require civics. So that is the kind of attitude I would bring. I also worked very hard when I was, in the last few years, I was in the legislature to get personal finance required. And it was finally required this year. And I commend the legislature for doing that. And if, Paul, if you had something to do with it, I commend you for it. So at any rate, that's the way I would approach it. Secondly, we have got to have locality pay. And we can get it now, because now that we've got over 10% of the membership of the House of Delegates and the Senate, we have a core group that if we are willing to sit down and bargain with people from other parts of the state, we can get it done. We basically say very politely, these things that you want for your area, I'm sure they're good, but we need you to support us getting locality pay.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's important to recognize that the teacher shortage that we're experiencing here in West Virginia and in the Eastern Panhandle, it's not unique to us. I mean, I think some folks like to think it is, but frankly, just nationally, we are not producing the number of teachers that we used to. I think as, you know, folks kind of, I'm sure, experienced the stress associated with teaching. I have, our oldest daughter is an educator. Certainly, you know, probably what she and her fellow teachers are experiencing today compared to what they experienced even a few years ago, it's dramatically different. So perhaps that's contributing, almost certainly it's contributing to the teacher shortage. I've been an advocate for school choice. I make no apologies for that. I believe our parents and students should have the same choices, opportunities that are prevalent in virtually every other state in the country. Having said that, and having sponsored the Hope Scholarship, having sponsored legislation to allow public charter schools, I think now we really need to double down on traditional public education. Our three children attended public schools. While, again, I want folks to have options, we simply need to do better in delivering, you know, a quality education to our students that are in the traditional public setting, because that's where 95% or more of the students are going to continue to matriculate. So we need to do better there. Pay raises. I can remember my first year or second year in the legislature. I can remember a lot of hoopla, a lot of jumping up and down because we gave teachers a 1% pay raise. That was when I was in the minority. John's party was in the majority, and they were celebrating because they had a 1% or 2% pay raise. We have enacted in the majority now 5% pay raises. Now, does that get us where we need to be? No. And we do need to continue to work on locality pay, and I think we are getting closer, but those are some of the things I think we need to focus on.
Alrighty, we have about enough time for one more question. So does anyone have any questions? Great.
DEI has been repeatedly discussed in a restrictive fashion. What are your views on this type of legislation, and what would your position be if a restriction was brought to the legislature?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. DEI has been repeatedly discussed.
Oh, DEI?
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Did you get the whole question?
I got it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess I was the last one, so I go first this time, I think. So we got out of order there. So I think my answer is similar to one of the earlier questions. I think you're referring to legislation that would restrict DEI efforts on college campuses, for example. Is that what you're getting at? You know, I would say that, again, while I support the goal of making sure that people are being treated fairly and equally, I do have concerns when you try to implement measures that are going to, in effect, discriminate against folks, despite the best efforts of those programs, that you could have discrimination. So, again, I think it's something where you really have to see the details of what it is, and that's the same approach I take with every piece of legislation. I know there was a bill referenced here a little bit earlier about Spanish language or foreign languages being taught. Am I in favor of foreign languages being taught? Yes, but you got to know the details. It's very easy to say just by the title of a bill, yeah, I'm going to support that. But when you look into it, well, what does it really mean? I mean, what is it going to cost? Is funding a program like that, for example, or funding the DEIA programs, is that going to mean that you can't give teachers a pay raise or do other worthwhile things in school? So I think those are some of the things you have to look at is what are the details? What is that program going to entail? Is it going to be done in a way that is encouraging all people to be treated equally, or does it in effect introduce or foster discrimination that I think all of us could agree we don't want to see happening on our college campuses or anywhere?
Let's go back to 1948. Harry Truman was president, and he asked the Congress that year to pass a law integrating the military. The Congress refused to do it. In the 1948 election, Harry Truman went around the country blasting that do-nothing Congress. This is one of the things they didn't do. He was advised to get back off of it. He was in deep trouble for re-election. But he said, no, we're going to do it, and he issued an executive order integrating the military. That has worked out wonderfully. If he had not done that, we wouldn't have people like Colin Powell and Tammy Duckworth and C.Q. Brown in our military. What it did is it opened up the military more so than much of society as an area where African Americans could believe that they would be treated fairly. And our military has improved since then. So when you hear this stuff that DEI means doing a favor to somebody, no. It's doing a favor to all of society. There's a tremendous amount of talent out there that is being missed, and Harry Truman figured that out. So I would suggest that what we should say is, let's do everything we can to take advantage of the talents of every one of our citizens. And that'll get us where we need to go. Thank you.
Great. So now we will ask you all to conclude, starting with Mr. Doyle.
Thank you all for having this. I'm going to touch on some topics that I was hoping we'd touch on, but we didn't get to. I support what's called the right to repair. When you buy a product, whether it's a tractor or an automobile or a computer or a refrigerator, right now, in most states, the company retains as proprietary the information needed to repair it, the computerized information. Some states have passed laws saying it's your right. And that way, if you can fix it, you can go ahead and do it. And if not, if you want to have your friendly neighborhood repair person fix it rather than the manufacturer, you can do that. Now, sure, most cases you're not going to go outside the warranty, but once that warranty is over, you ought to be able to go anywhere you want to have that repaired. I stand very strong in support of your right to vote and your right to have that vote counted. I introduced a bill about 4 years ago when I was still in the legislature, which would have been a comprehensive rewrite of West Virginia's election laws, and I think it was a really good bill. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State, Mac Warner, opposed it, and that bill is not law. So, and finally, I stand for good public schools. In addition to things like locality pay, I think we need to stop cannibalizing the public schools to fund private schools. I got no objection to private schools if somebody wants to send their child to a private school. But a private school is supposed to be private. It's not supposed to be taxpayer supported.
Well, thank you, Eli, and thank you also to the Shepherd University Student Government Association and the Stubblefield Institute Civility Club for hosting tonight's candidate forum. As I've shared, I'm very proud of the legislative accomplishments that we've accomplished over the last dozen years or so. I believe this election, though, is about who can best represent the 16th district going forward. I've demonstrated what can be accomplished when you work together as a team rather than engage in divisive Washington-style politics. And that's the same collaborative, consensus-building approach that I'll take to the state Senate if I'm fortunate to be elected. I respectfully ask you, my fellow residents of the 16th District, for your vote, and would welcome the opportunity to continue to represent you in the West Virginia legislature. For those of you that would like more information on my candidacy, would invite you to visit my website, www.espinosaforsenate.com. I do have social media pages as well, both X and Instagram, as well as Facebook, so you can catch me on there. I'm pretty easy to find in the community. If you'd like to volunteer, be involved in my campaign, please send me a note through my website or otherwise, and would love to have you join Team Espinosa. Thank you very much.